Hey guys, Dan here with this week's Connor's review coming to you from my bedroom. And we've got Pilot Lights and Sister Fights as this week's episode. And we have two main stories here. Again, the titles lately, if they say two things, there's two stories. If they say three things, there's three stories. Next week's has three things in the title: CPAPs, Hickeys, and Biscuits. So I assume there's going to be three different storylines next week. But this week we are focused on Louise and Dan, which is a holdover from the tail end of last week's episode. And then as well, Becky, Darlene, and Ben sort of having issues with... Ben's not really having issues with anybody. Darlene's having issues, I guess, with both of them. And then, Ben and Becky are sort of, bystanders, but maybe also poking the bear a little bit. So let's start, I guess, with the Dan and Louise stuff, because that's how this episode starts off. So when last we saw Dan was sort of being razzed at the poker game about, being... wanting to be with Louise and being too scared and thinking he won't be good in bed and this and that. So he has a big talk with Becky, which was wonderful. We talked about that last week. And so at the end of the episode, he drives a couple hundred miles, or rides, I guess, on his motorcycle to see Louise and her band play. And then as he's about to sort of go backstage afterwards and give her some flowers, he sees her making out with one of the band members. So we start right from there. The very first scene, the opening, is him giving those flowers to her in the parking lot and saying, look, I saw you kissing that keyboard guy and I just went crazy. I threw these in the garbage, but I brought them for you. You should have them. She rejects him, basically, and says, cool that you're ready for this, but I've moved on and this and that and the other thing. And he ends up staying there overnight because he doesn't really want to make the whole drive back, and his butt was kind of sore from riding that whole time. But he ends up, back at the bar with the keyboardist because he's also there drinking, and so the two of them have kind of a heart-to-heart, and he says, oh my gosh, tell Louise I love her, da-da-da-da-da, I wanted her to see that I'm ready. And he was like, well, I don't know if I love her or not, the keyboardist was. So it ends towards the end of the episode with Louise coming to the Connor house and sort of, announcing, look, what the hell are you doing here, Dan? You're going to my keyboardist to tell me how much you love me, tell me. And she thought the whole thing was very juvenile, very high school. And just as I was thinking, well, the last time he did this, he was in high school. He said it himself. So I thought that was great, very realistic. And then by the end of the scene, they are kissing because she sees that he finally took his wedding ring off. That was from a conversation he had with Jackie in the middle of the episode. And, he decided, okay, it's time. If I'm going to be ready to be with Louise, I may as well take the wedding ring off. And so that, I think, proves enough to Louise that he really is ready for something. And so they are kissing at the end of the episode, and that is so great. I love Louise. I was talking about this with some of you guys on the comments on last week's episode, that hopefully this is not the last we see of Katie Seagal's character, because she's so great and the character is so great. And please, let's have more of this. So I'm so glad they picked up where they left off. It could have been a completely, by the wayside storyline. They could have just said, okay, well, this is it then. Louise doesn't have to be in it anymore. The storyline has kind of ended. But I hoped that they would resolve it, if not this episode, maybe before the end of the season at least, because there's only, I think, 3 more, or maybe there's only 2 more after this one. This is episode 18, yeah, so there's only 2 more after this one. So I'm glad they got to that. So that was the 1A story. The other one has to do with Ben, Darlene, and Becky. Ben and Darlene are trying to have a child, but Darlene is in her 40s and is worried that, it may not happen. Whereas she had to be kind of convinced in the first place to even do it because she already has a family, but Ben does not have any kids of his own, so he's taken a huge shining to Becky's daughter, Beverly Rose, and Darlene has been snoring lately. So Ben, in the first part of the episode, was downstairs in the living room at 1 in the morning watching some sort of bear attack show or competition show with Becky while she was up taking care of Beverly Rose. So they were sort of bonding over that. Darlene comes in, gets pissed, assumes that Becky is trying to basically steal Ben from her, and is proven even more correct in her mind when Ben blows off an important meeting the next day to try and get this magazine up and running that they're trying, because Becky needed the water heater fixed so she could have a shower. So Darlene just kind of blows up on both of them, and Ben talks her off the ledge and says, look, this is crazy. I don't have feelings for Becky at all. You're jumping to conclusions, this and that and the other thing. One thing that I thought was really interesting, that maybe now that we know that some things from the original Roseanne happened and some didn't, like a lot of the producers have said that the whole story with Jackie's kid Andy, like that never really happened. But, there was a part there when Sarah Chalke had taken over the role of Becky for a couple seasons, where she and David had sort of a little thing going on. She was married to Mark, but, Roseanne fans will remember this. Him and Darlene were broken up at the time, and, Becky was enjoying the attention that David was giving her. So I don't know if that is a real thing that is in the realm of the Connors universe still, or if that's something that never happened to begin with. Because I think it would have been interesting if they had maybe talked about that, and Darlene saying, like, look, there was a time when Becky was going after David, so why wouldn't she be going after you as well, kind of thing. But they didn't go that route, so okay, fine, maybe that never happened in the real world. It just happened to us viewers, and it was part of Roseanne's book that she was writing or whatever. But those are the two stories anyway. So they didn't converge on each other at all. They were completely separate. In fact, I don't even think any of the people shared a scene with each other. Right? Was John Goodman? Did he share any scenes with any of those people? He was with Jackie, but she only showed up a little bit to kind of talk about wearing his ring still, and she made some great jokes about being Lanford's life coach and former number one life coach, which always makes me laugh. And she even admitted, like, well, yes, I've tried everything. I've tried thruples. It doesn't work. So there was some good back and forth there, some good jokes. They've been having actually a lot of good scenes lately in the garage. Last week's scene with Dan and Becky was probably my favorite of the whole episode, and I loved this week's too. I like that that's sort of the new. Well, and it's not necessarily that new, because they did use it a lot in the old series, but there were a lot of other places for really meaningful conversations as well. The kitchen, the girls' room, the lunchbox sometimes, but the Connors have really taken to this garage as sort of a cathartic place. And it makes sense, because that's where Dan, I think, feels the most comfortable toying with the motorcycle. And in one episode, might have been last week or a couple of weeks ago, Becky made a joke like, you've been working on this bike for 30 years, either it's fixed or it's not, whatever. But that's the thing. I think that place gives him solace. That gives him, certainly, it makes him feel useful, and that's something that's, I think, on a deeper level. They don't come out and say that, but anybody that's known this Dan Connor character for 30 years, I think, knows that the garage is where he feels the most at home. So it's no surprise that his most dramatic scenes come from there in this version of the Connor family. So I loved that. Mark was not in the episode at all, which I always hate, but it's okay, because he had a great episode story last week. And Harris was in it for, again, one scene. DJ and Mary, of course, absent again. Don't care. But this episode, more than anything, I think, maybe in the entire season, has shown that really the core 4 members of this cast are Lacey Goranson, John Goodman, Laurie Metcalf, and of course Sarah Gilbert. And we can bring some other people in. I love the Katie Seagal character. I love J.R. Ferguson as Ben. But those four are really the core of this show. I mean, Jackie, okay, she wasn't in it that much this episode, but I really like that they've brought Becky and Darlene back to this great sibling rivalry place where they can fight and they can make up and then they can joke about the fight. I mean, that is an earmark of the original Roseanne series, especially with between Roseanne and Jackie, but also between Becky and Darlene too. So I think it's great that they're bringing this back. The way that everything got resolved with the Ben, Darlene, Becky story was so great in that last scene. You know, Becky comes into the kitchen and she's like, "Oh, I'm going to get some milk. Now that doesn't mean I'm trying to have sex with Ben, Darlene." You know, and it was this great sibling rivalry camaraderie. I'm so happy that Lacey Goranson has been so strong this season, and really last season too. You know, and I said this either last week or one of the recent weeks. But you know, she started out a little rocky in Roseanne season 10, and maybe more than a little rocky. But you know, she is so great. I can't see this show without her. So I'm so glad that and they're writing for her character too. You know, they're writing things that make sense for the Becky character. I think when Sarah Chalk took over, I mean, the whole show was sort of on a downward slope at that point anyway. But when Sarah Chalk took over the role, it was just a completely different Becky. And so I'm glad that we're seeing the original Becky that Lacey Goranson, she didn't create, but that she, owned back in the day. Now, this episode was directed by our good friend Fred Savage. I love him, all the way back to the Wonder Years, but he does so much great television directing work on so many different shows and sitcoms. This is his second episode this season directing, and the first was the one right before the Thanksgiving slap episode. So we were really like ramping up with the whole lunchbox stuff in the first episode he directed. And then the writer of this one is a new writer that has not written so far this season, Daniel Talbot. But I loved the writing in this episode. It was very funny. There wasn't, a scene that wasn't hilarious. John Goodman has such great responses. He's got such great timing, whether it's a serious line or a joking line or a line where he's just sort of vegging on the couch, tossing off a joke, but his line read just, makes it, he punches it up, like in the words or in the mouth of another actor, it might not be as strong, but Goodman always pulls it off. He had so many great lines this episode. For me, this is one of the best of the season. I missed Mark, but at the same time, there wasn't enough story to go around. We didn't really need anybody else involved with these two storylines. And certainly we already heard a couple of episodes ago Mark's take on the whole baby thing. We got a little bit from Harris today, but again, it was nice that Darlene had sort of a voice of reason, and I guess you can't have Jackie mixing in both storylines. She comes in from the garage and then talks to Darlene about her thing after talking to Dan. I mean, you could have, but I don't think that would have been as good. I like that we at least got we got to hear from one of Darlene's children about it. I really, really hope we're still going to see Johnny Galecki before the end of this season. It's been since the very beginning of the season with the whole, Darlene dating both guys at once. That was episode probably 4, maybe the last time we saw David and Ben together. I would love to see, I think it was, I don't know the exact episode, but I think it was like episode 3 or 4. But I would love to see Johnny Galecki back. Big Bang Theory has been off the air now for a year. Like, come on, give us some sort of David, and I hope that they do. But in any event, this was a very strong episode. I love where the story went. I love the sibling rivalry part. I love, J.R. Ferguson as Ben is so funny. He fits in so well with these characters and this family. So this episode for me gets an A really, really strong one. We have, like I said, just 2 left in the season, so we will see how everything goes with that. I don't know if we're going to get, a cliffhanger. I don't know. I know that they filmed all the episodes they needed to for the season before the quarantine shut Hollywood down. So we're not going to end on a weird note that the producers weren't expecting. So whatever happens is going to happen. But I'm so happy that this episode, or this series really, is in full swing again. And ever since the quarantine has been shut down, I've been saying this on my weekly TV review shows, that ratings are up for pretty much everything across the board because more people are just at home with nothing to do, so they start watching things. So this episode and the last episode, and the last couple of episodes really have gotten the highest ratings all season for the Connors. So, just cementing its place as the #1 comedy on ABC. So this is all good news, and this was a great episode to go with it. Please comment below. I always love hearing from you guys on your thoughts on the different episodes, and maybe you're home with nothing to do as well during the quarantine, so plenty of time to be on the computer. So yeah, please comment, let me know your thoughts on this episode, and check out my other videos tomorrow. I've got one for The Masked Singer coming. We'll have our usual TV review on probably Thursday or Friday, and then our movie review for the week on Saturday. Also, I figured out how to record Zoom calls. I tested it out over the weekend, and so I think I'm finally going to be able to have some of my other videos that I employ guests with, for example, Fraser Friday, and Dan Does Disney. So hopefully, some of my daily videos will no longer be just me blathering on for, 20 or 40 minutes. I will have guests to blather with. So hopefully that will be coming soon. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. Be safe. Bye.